we go back to when you do look at the phase 2, phase 3 trial, it was completely fraudulent. There are several experts that have documented that, clearly documented. Sasha Latipova has documented that. Brooke Jackson, a whistleblower from Ventavia, who is one of the research companies that outsourced the research from Pfizer, documented it. This was published in the British Journal of Medicine. These studies were all fraudulent. Let me tell you something here. With regards to my specialty, there are only two irrefutable sources of data.
You got to restart it or what?
And they're both from the government. One is the Pfizer post-marketing rollout that showed it was the deadliest drug and most injurious drug ever rolled out in the history of medicine. And the second study was my study with Dr. McCullough and 7 of us. And we used governmental data.
Okay.
We used a completely open source. Anybody in the world could look at the data, and we looked at the effects on pregnancy, and it was devastating. That's been published in a peer-reviewed medical journal for over 12 months. Anybody in the world could have refuted it, but they can't because it's open source. It's governmental data. It's not McCullough's. It's not Thorpe's.
Right. So, okay. So you pointed out that the safety the safety testing wasn't done properly, obviously, because they didn't follow a proper procedure in terms of, what kind of trial that they were running. So to go back to the informed consent, I mean, and you had mentioned, Dr. Thorpe, earlier, like these people need to be held accountable. I mean, Dr. Moon, given what Dr. Thorpe just described and what you had mentioned about informed consent, I mean, typically in any other time in history, people would be held for account and have to go to trial for violating these very regular medical procedures. Correct? I mean, there would be there would be people held accountable for fraud. Is that what we'd be looking at in a regular atmosphere?
Look, I'm a pediatrician.
Atmosphere?
I'm not a legislator or a legal person, but I will say that this has been absolutely catastrophic and unprecedented. They talk about evidence. Oh, there's no evidence of this or no evidence of that. There is literally an avalanche of evidence of how dangerous these products are. And this pediatrician can tell you, as many physicians can, Dr. Thorpe can tell you, we have personally spoken to the families who have lost their loved ones from this shot. There can be no doubt. The younger these people are, and they die within a week or two of receiving this shot from an enlarged, inflamed heart, the more obvious. It just can't be more obvious than that. The evidence is literally directly in front of us. So to be giving children and young adults especially, and that's what I have to speak for. I have to be a voice for them. To be giving them a product for what reason? They have a statistical zero risk of a fatality from the infection itself. So what is their risk of a death? They could die from this shot. They could have permanent heart damage from this shot. It is criminal to think that we are giving them something that is riskier than the illness itself ever was.
Let me rephrase.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Do you believe that these pediatricians that recommends? I think some of them believe they were doing the right thing, but do you believe in your heart that many of them really knew they shouldn't be doing it, but they were doing it and making these recommendations to children because it's just common sense. You don't have to be a medical doctor. Really knew they shouldn't be doing it, but they were doing it and making these recommendations to children because it's just common sense. You don't have to be a medical doctor. Really knew they shouldn't be doing it, but they were doing it and making these recommendations to children because it's just
a technical difficulty. There we go.
Some sort of a loop.
Yeah,
we're good now.
There we go.
I can only tell you what I've seen. And so what I've seen is that colleagues that were pushing this because we all at some point trusted our regulatory agencies. Everyone in medicine did at some point because you can't, it's such a huge amount of corruption that no one can even wrap their head around how big this is. So everyone wakes up to it at some point. What I'm seeing are practices that used to push these shots on children just a few years ago as the shots rolled out, have absolutely backed away from it. And they're not doing it at all anymore. I've talked to colleagues who say, well, we're not giving that anymore. And they just work around it and they don't give it any longer. But so I think they did believe it at one point, and now they don't. You have to understand that they have come after us with a vengeance for even daring to speak. So people have lost jobs over this. People have lost careers, just for even daring to bring up the very obvious, which is again what they're seeing in front of their own eyes. So many offices now are it's represented by the very low number of people giving this shot to anyone any longer in America. People have woken up to this, but the problem remains. The fraud and the corruption that led to this remains, and we need to fix that. I do want to point out just for a second also the employer that reported me for speaking at that event in Washington, D.C., and just raising a basic question was a medical school chairman. And this is happening in our medical schools around the country. We are in so much trouble because these young medical students are going to be our future doctors in just a few years. And they have been taught that they can't say a peep about anything. They have no free speech. They can't say anything or they'll lose their entire career at a time where they are saddled with debt and they're at the very early stages of their career. So we have a whole system of corruption that stems from the pharmaceutical companies, the media, big tech, but it also infiltrates right down into our law schools, our medical schools, and down into the employer level. So most physicians are hired by corporations, by hospital networks, by clinics
who are run by pharmaceutical companies, right? They're funded by pharmaceutical companies.
They're not free to speak. I think in some ways it was easier for me to speak about the COVID shot because I can, raise my right hand and swear and be truthful in that I never ordered the shot or recommended it for a single patient. I happened to wake up to this in time. Other colleagues may not have woken up in time, but they are increasingly awake to this now. Many are waking up to this now.
So I'd like to hear from both of you, your opinion on what we can do to fight this, right? Or defend it or expose it, knowing that it's an uphill battle. So what are some of the things that you're doing or somebody's doing, or so our audience can hear? What are the options to expose this? And what do you suggest people that are listening that hear you talking here that we can do to try to stop it or to expose it? Either one of you.
Yeah, I'll start. Because I lose a lot of sleep about this. We're in this really wicked situation where we have shackles around so many people, right? And really, in some ways, we're doing it to ourselves because the people who are awake to this, many of them are just their tendency is to just be quiet and kind of drift off to the side and let somebody else handle it. And so even though they understand what's happening, they're like, well, you're doing a great job, thanks for fighting for freedom, and they kind of drift off to the side and they don't want to get their themselves in trouble, right? The speaking, everyone needs to speak. Everyone needs to be very loud about this. Being silent and hiding in a corner somewhere, it may help you for a short amount of time, but in the end, this mess is coming for you and your children and your grandchildren. And so right now, as much as you possibly can, you need to be so loud. You need to be louder than you've ever been. You need to be pushier than you've ever been. It's not a comfortable feeling for any of us to stand up to authority or stand up to other people, but we need to be doing that right now. We need to be very loud and say, look, these are our taxpayer dollars and we're not tolerating this. So I think that's one aspect of it. We could go into other things, but I'll let Dr. Thorpe make a comment.
Thank you, Dr. Thorpe.
Let Dr. Thorpe answer
let me follow up on that.
Wait,
hold on. Let me follow up before. Just answer this as you're answering that question because I want to follow up what you said earlier. Given what you said about the lack of rigor for the randomized placebo-controlled trials, could anyone have had informed consent? Anyone that had taken the shot actually had informed consent?
Are you asking me?
I was asking Dr. Thorpe. Dr. Thorpe.
Or Dr. Thorpe. Yeah,
Standard
Dr. Thorpe
topic.
can answer.
Yeah.
Nobody's had informed consent. It's absolutely zero impossible. You saw that, and I have one right here. I just walked into the pharmacy earlier this year, got the same thing, completely blank. You can't give informed consent. This was a sham. This was a lie. These are killers. This was purposely perpetrated. The MD, PhD, this Dr. Masawasi over in Japan just today, look at his talk on the Vigilant News Network. It is stunning. This is an MD PhD. And basically he said this was perpetrated on the global population purposefully to poison them with the mRNA vaccine. This is a highly qualified individual. There was no informed consent. It is impossible to give informed consent when you have every single physician in the United States of America under a threat to lose their license and their credentials if they do give informed consent. Look at Dr. Moon. Look at me, Dr. Thorpe. You know, we've lost our jobs for simply speaking at the request of invited to a Senate hearing in the United States Senate, appearing on Tucker Carlson. So there is no freedom of speech. There is no informed consent. And, you know, I will say, too, that some of the more recent data I've looked at using the FDA data, and I published this on my X account, it'll soon be published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. If you look at the various data, these vaccines are associated, you know, they use a safety signal of 2 for a risk ratio. You know, if you look at a COVID-19 vaccine versus other vaccines, you're looking at cognitive, intellectual abnormalities. Can't connect the dots. They can't think. They're stupid. They're dumb. They become mentally retarded. If you pull those variables out and compare it from the COVID-19 vaccine with other vaccines, there's a massive safety signal, massive breach of safety signal. We're looking up to that. It should be less than 2. It's up to 80. The same thing for psychiatric illnesses. The same thing for suicide and suicidal ideation. This is not Jim Thorpe. This is the government's data. So part of this inability for these people to connect the dots, there's no doubt in my mind that they're cognitively impaired from these shots and that they have psychiatric illness from these shots. I think that's part of it.
I'm going to point out also that, you know, so when I first started practice in the late 1990s, they pulled the first rotavirus vaccine off the market for less than 100 cases of a rare intestinal problem in kids. This was nationwide, less than 100 cases. And they did that out of an abundance of caution. Just in the last year or two, they pulled a formula, I forget which one, but they pulled a formula off the market out of, quote, an abundance of caution. You know, they investigated this airplane that lost remember the door that fell off the airplane? They investigated all the other planes out of an abundance of, where in the world is the abundance of caution when it comes to this product right now?
Right.
Like, this is clearly intentional because they're coming after anyone who dares speak out. And that's all you need to know is that we're living in this nightmare right now as a nation. And whether you sit there quietly and ignore it or not, it's coming for you and your children and your grandchildren. So we need everyone to just be as loud as you can. Right now is the time, because that's how we make this go away. We all have to start speaking out and take ownership of fixing this, and not just leave it on the shoulders of the few who are putting themselves at risk.
Yeah, let's go back, Dr. Thorpe, to finish the topic we tried before. So Renata already answered the question. What can you say to the audience on things that they could do, try to do, inform, educate them to try to stand up and help us expose this or fight back?
Absolutely what us four are doing right now. We're speaking the truth. You two heroes having us on. You're broadcasting out truth and information. This is what we need to do. Americans need to stop. They've all voted for 95% of Americans know this is a joke and that they'll never take a vaccine again, but they're not speaking out. They need to speak out, just like Dr. Moon said. It's very, very important. Also, I would promote books. Buy a book, buy a hard book. Look at Turtles All the Way Down. Every American should read that book. This is a 500-page book that's geared towards not doctors. It's really geared towards non-medical people. I've read it. It's very simple to understand. And this was written by 2 Israeli anonymous authors, okay? And it was reviewed by a couple of actually criminal professors at a major university, and was published, their review in a medical journal, Harafetz, which is Yiddish for medicine. It's like their New England Journal of Medicine. They put a rave review in it. The authors remained anonymous. That's been published now for 5 years. Not one person around the world has ever disputed one fact in that book. Not one. I would challenge every American, every person in the world to read that book. It's 500 pages. It's exceedingly well referenced, about 1,100 references, and it's irrefutable. And, they'll go through all the statements that I made. There has never, ever been a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial for any of the vaccines on the schedule. And when we go and when I publish with all the stuff I publish from their database, they make me compare a novel vaccine with a safe and effective vaccine, which is an absolute breach. Of course, I'll do it because that's the way they ask me to do it. But there's such a huge danger, killing, and injury that they can't even hide it now with using, instead of a real control group, another vaccine. All vaccines cause death and injury. All of them do. It's just a matter of how much.
Could you explain what a novel vaccine is for the audience?
A new vaccine. Like when Dr. Moon was talking about, the rotavirus, you look at the rotavirus vaccine, they didn't use a placebo. They didn't use a placebo in the role. You look at the mumps vaccine, the MMR vaccines, the Tdap vaccines, none of them used a placebo group.
They all have
and
to have that,
they all lie, and they fraudulently publish that. There were no randomized double-blind placebo groups for COVID vaccine, even in the phase 2 trials. They were all faked and manipulated.
Yeah, I was in a double-blind study between University of Chicago and University of Illinois. I was the only patient at University of Chicago. So I experienced it for 2 years myself. I was in a double-blind study for prostate cancer where I had to drink a protein shake every single day. So the doctors didn't know, nor did I, if I was taking super, super high doses of soy or just regular protein for 2 years. So they don't even tell you.
But essentially what you're saying is that then nobody can know what the actual risk profile of the vaccine is, correct? Because they're not testing. Like, people don't know whether the cure is worse than the disease, right? Isn't that kind of the idea?
That's absolutely right. Listen, right now, okay, in 1986, if you take from the fetus to 12 months of life after birth, there were ridiculous 22 vaccines. Now, there's 44 vaccines.
Wow.
From a fetus to just 12 months of life. This is what is killing and injuring. This is causing SIDS. This is causing autism. This is causing chronic illness.
Just from, you said 44 from fetus to 12 months? Not.
Yes.
Oh
yes.
my God.
I can prove it. Go to my Substack. Not my Substack. Go to my X account. I've looked at it. I've researched it. I've counted them up. Yeah. Now, that's not 42 separate doses, because some of those doses have 3 vaccines in them, but there's 44 vaccines.
Jeez. What Republicans, organizations, or like Tucker Carlson, are people that are reaching out to you guys, right, to help get the story, to help, like our show, right? We're not like Tucker Carlson, but what's going on from our side, from individuals that have the money or wherewithal to help you get your message out there? Is there anyone that's embracing you to share this besides Tucker Carlson or?
Yeah, we've had a lot of, I think Dr. Thorpe froze, but we've had a lot of platforms. And so Dr. Thorpe and I actually co-host a show on Patriot. It's airing on Patriot TV and Worldview Weekend called Two Docs, just TWODOCS. So we co-host a show that's a weekly show. addressing a lot of our concerns about what's happening in healthcare. I think the viewer just needs to understand that, a lot of this is silent. It's kind of behind the scenes. You may not know what's happening, but the world of medicine is literally on fire right now. We are just crumbling. I mean, 10 years ago, 6 years ago, we could have robust discussions with our colleagues. We could talk about things. Now there's a silent taboo on the topics that we all know are hot potato. And people are literally losing their careers and their jobs if they even dare bring up some of the very ideas that we've brought up tonight. So we're in very unprecedented times. We know that. I did want to add that, as a child, I visited my relatives under communism. So I was 11 when I first visited my grandparents and my aunts and uncles behind the Iron Curtain of communism.
Where was it? What country?
What country? In former Czechoslovakia, in Prague. And so they were literally being fed propaganda by their media. And I remember sitting in my grandmother's apartment with her, and she kind of shushed me and said, "You have to be very quiet, but I'm going to put on the Voice of America." There was a show called Hlas Ameriky. It was the Voice of America. And it was us. It was the Americans piping in the truth to my relatives because they didn't have any free and fair press. And she had to be very careful because if she was caught listening, she was old, but they probably wouldn't have not done too much to her at that point. But she could have gone to prison for even listening to this being piped in. But I was such a proud little kid. And I'm like, that's us. Those are my people. Those are the Americans piping in the truth. And look at where we are today. We have just slid down this cliff where we are so censored. We are the ones who need the truth piped into America now. Thank you for what you're doing with this show and the many other shows similar to yours. This is what is getting the word out to our citizens, to America, about what's happening. And so the effect that you're having on the population is huge. You're getting the story out. And so everyone has a role in it. But those of you listening, no sitting there silently. We need to be waking everybody up to the horror of this. And we all need to figure out what to do. It's not an easy fix, but it will not be fixed if you just sit there quietly. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Sounds like looks like we lost Dr. Thorpe, huh?
Yeah,
I think so.
Do you have any closing statements besides what you just said, which was pretty much a closing statement? Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm very alarmed about what's happening in medical education. Our students are actively being selected across the country now for their social media justice type platforms. They're really the woke students are being selected. The students who are in the system who are, who have differing perspectives they want to share and they have different viewpoints. They tell me, I've spoken to many of them around the nation, they say it's like walking on eggshells. They really just can't say anything for fear of being reported, for fear of being removed from the school. So we have no free speech any longer in our world of medical education. And the same is true for the law, the legal world, for
Corporate
colleges.
America.
We need to start working to fix that. We need everyone to start speaking out, and our students need to have free debate and discussion and dialogue again. We're honestly worse than some of the countries that we have in the past tried to save, like North Korea and Cuba. People have fled from those countries and told us that we're actually worse here right now than it is back in their home country. That should really startle everybody and have us realize how far we've fallen. And we fix that by all speaking. We can't just sit there quietly again. So make some noise.
Well, thank you so much. Sometime in the future, we'll have you back on so we can maybe get some updates on things that progressed from, on any angle, and we really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moon. And thank you, Dr. Thorpe. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We lost him there. But,
he froze. But thank you all so much for having us on. We appreciate it. And please watch Two Docs. If people want to, I should put one more plug in. If people want to read about what's happened in my situation, because it's not about me, it's about all of our freedom. Look at silentmajorityfoundation.org, silentmajorityfoundation.org, and you can find my case documents. You can actually read the letters from the medical school chairman, from the medical commission as they came after me. You can read those letters. They're public documents. So please let people know what's happening, because we can't let this continue.
And
no, not in America. We have a constitution.
Two Docs is on Patriot TV. Is that what you
Patriot TV, and also on the Worldview Weekend with Brandon House. So we air every Saturday and Sunday. But our taped shows are available anytime. So please look for that.
said?
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Go check it out.
Thank you for
everybody.
having us on. Appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Doc.
Thanks.
Well, hope you guys like that. Hope you learned something.
I hope you don't take any more boosters.
Yeah.
Anything? Did we want to mention any?
Oh yeah. Next week we're gonna have what's his?
G6?
Yeah, what's his name?
And also, I got
I'm
a
awful.
little
I'm
announcement
awful.
from our buddy Don. I forgot to bring
I
up
am
that.
so awful here. Holy shit.
Real quick, we've got Call to the Capitals, Illinois, Springfield. Pray, fast, and stand. Saturday, 1 to 3, April 13th, 2024. Who's this with? Don't mess with our kids.us. Don't mess with our kids.us. Go check it out. They're having an event at the Illinois Capitol on April 13th, 2024. There you go, Don Kraus. Sorry I didn't get the graphic up.
And then we're gonna have Daniel Goodwin on. So he wrote he directed a documentary on January 6th that Tucker Carlson said was awesome. I think we put it out there. So he's going to be on there. We're going to share stories, some of what I experienced at January 6th, as well as his documentary, obviously, and kind of expose some of the Democrats'
Bullshit.
conspiracy to put poor.
It's bullshit.
Yeah, it was just a joke, man.
I mean, I saw somebody the other day mention how, there were some FBI guys in the crowd. It was one of those undercover videos. He was like, oh, yeah. It was a CIA guy. He's like, oh, yeah.
Yes.
Not only were they saying, oh, yeah, there's a bunch of FBI guys in the crowd, and the guy was like, what happened to him? He was like, oh, well, they're working for the agency now.
So we're going to have another radical right-wing extremist that went to see the president speak.
Whoa, easy.
And
you mean a Hitler type?
yes, so we're going to look forward to that. And then that's it, I guess. Have a good night.
Are we still on? We look